Never know how to start these things. So the question I get asked the most is, tell me the story of your spiritual journey. This is the first, YouTube, so I figured that's a great place to start. People ask me this question, I never actually know where to start because obviously it's a lifelong journey, right? Your spiritual journey doesn't just start when you have like an awakening, it's happening your whole life. And so something my partner likes to remind me of is like, remember the question is, when did you become aware that you were on a spiritual journey? And that perspective actually sheds a lot of light on my particular journey, because the moment I sort of had like a large awakening to the moment where I became aware that I was on a spiritual journey was 3.5 years. So I think it's actually really relevant to the story. As far as things leading up to that sort of awakening event for me, I was raised in a church. I've always been a huge fan of all things, Bible. I was the kid who was in the church reading the Bible while the pastor was preaching and just like tuning it out, which now I'm thinking about it as like, of course, spirituality has always been something I've been incredibly curious about. I actually went to a private Christian school, did that for a while. And after I went to college and I was a little turned off by religion. And I wasn't even like consciously like being like, this isn't it for me, but it's just so much of it didn't make a lot of sense for me. That has since changed. We'll be doing a lot of content on that too. But it just didn't make a lot of sense for me, and it was really frustrating. So I think I kind of leaned in the agnostic energy for a bit. And in the meantime, I had kind of gotten out of school. I started acting. And I was, hustling, had a bunch of jobs. And something I wasn't aware of was that I had placed the totality of my self-worth on my job. An idea that we're going to talk a lot about on this channel is actually seeking validation outside of yourself. The idea that this thing out there is going to give me something that I need, which I think is a bottomless pit of suffering. Of course, at the time I was not aware, and I hit a point in my career where I was like, oh man, I might be able to quit my day job. We're making money. Things are going well. I'm booking jobs. I did a movie, and I had this subtle expectation like that was going to be the thing to make me happy, and it was not. I has never been more depressed. And mind you, this wasn't like I wasn't just crushing it. You know what I mean? Like in hindsight, I'm glad it happened when it did, because so I kind of ended up spiraling into this deep depression because I was like, I've got the things, I'm seeing myself on TV and stuff. Like, how come I'm not happy? And something about, LA, if you're not aware, is you can really be a recluse here. Like, you don't got to see people if you don't want to. And so I just kind of retreated into a sort of cave of solitude and depression. And eventually that would give way to a point where I was like, this isn't it for me anymore. I remember I had a buddy of mine hit me up. He was like, yo, let's go to lunch. And I was in a hole, and I was like, nah, man, I ain't doing that. I think I lied though. I think I was like, I got an audition today, which definitely was a lie. At the time, he called me again, and he was like, yo, like, let's go to dinner. And I was like, all right, man, whatever, fine. And I remember it being a work thing, and eventually it became very clear to him very quickly that I was like not in a good place. So he spent most of the dinner like kind of building me up and lifting me up, and for whatever reason it was enough to give me enough of a boost to kind of go, you know what, all right, maybe there's some things here that need to change because you don't feel well. That led me to an acting coach that I really liked. It was an interesting class because the class was mostly about energy. It wasn't a lot of acting involved, and so over that course, I ended up getting kind of into meditation, and it was one of the first times that I was presented with the idea that being judgmental wasn't the move for me. So I started noticing, how I was judging other people and other people judging me. And what I wasn't aware of was that I was letting go of so many long-held resistances and things that over the course of my life that I just wasn't aware of. To kind of fast forward, after having this sort of regimented schedule, I would like get up, I'd like listen to the class because I had it like on audio, and I'd go for a run, and I was like being really methodical about how I was doing things. And remember at one point I came home, I come home from a vacation, and my buddy's like, bro, you gotta come over. He's like, it feels like the universe is being like pressed into my mind right now. And I was like, that's a weird way to say things. I came over, and I remember he showed me a YouTube video, and I was like, all right, it was weird, but the YouTube video I'm not gonna even drop because I don't know if it's even useful or interesting. But what was interesting about it was the person on the YouTube video described God in a way that I had never been exposed to, in a way that didn't create this separation between me and, you know, everything else. And in that moment, like, it felt like the universe was getting pressed into my head too. And I was like, oh wait, what? I just remember this massive, almost a pop in an expansion. And it was kind of overwhelming at the time. And we'll do videos and things on spiritual awakenings and that. But at the time, I just remember being like, oh shit, like everything was crazy in that moment. Literally in this moment, I was like, every religion, they immediately made sense to me. You know, I could see interconnection between, you know, every religion and the pencil in front of me, and we'll get to that as well. It was just this overflowing of like energy and perception and a true paradigm shift. Something that I feel like is interesting about my particular journey is that it was like 2 years before I heard the phrase spiritual awakening, and I had no clue what it meant. It just sounded like what I was going through. So for those 2 years, I spent the entirety of that time sort of just trying to apply this to my life, the awakening experience. And I literally was just meditating, just a regular sort of mindfulness meditation, still kind of doing my thing. But it never crossed my mind that, you know, any of what was happening to me was, quote, spiritual, until I kind of heard it just in passing from someone. And I was like, oh, and that's what opened up the door to a larger area of study and curiosity and just a big change in my life. You know, from that point, I started getting really curious about, you know, all things spiritual. Like many of you, like I was in every rabbit hole. I researched everything, found gurus and teachers and things. But I think the biggest thing that came out of that was I started getting really clear about what was mine and what was everybody else's. And what I mean by that is like, what's everybody else's shoulds that I had taken on as, you know, what I was supposed to do in my life, right? There was a ton of baggage that I could begin to go, oh, okay, that's not necessarily mine, which made me more curious about, you know, what I actually enjoyed doing. For me, that was getting to, you know, to talk to people, getting to share this, what we're doing right now. And it sort of formed this interesting paradox, because so much of what I feel like the practice is walking in alignment with what's truthful for you. And so for me, it sort of aligning in the sort of spiritual space, I thought made it really awkward, because I was like, who am I to share any of this with anybody? But what I was noticing was, it was such a paradigm shift. It was the frame of reference in which I interpreted the totality of my reality. I was kind of being that guy who was like looking for any reason to bring it up, any reason to talk about it. Everything was just that. And it was this nonstop stream of just info and stuff. So eventually I started talking about it on Instagram, just to give everybody in my life sort of the space to kind of opt out, as well as to kind of give myself like a valve release, so I wasn't just looking for reasons all the time to just bring it up to literally everybody that I could see. And kind of just from that point, it just felt right. I started seeing people in my life kind of come up to me and say, you know, that what you said the other day really resonated with me. And other things in my life started falling in place as I was walking in alignment with what I felt like was really the only thing I gave a shit about doing. So time passed from there, and then, you know, I started Motivational Speaker on TikTok, and here we are. I like to tell people that's just a really basic story. Like, I feel really like normal. It feels very sort of by the numbers as far as spiritual awakenings go. As I continue to walk in alignment with this, I'll be sharing the totality of that journey with y'all here on YouTube, and just any ideas, tips, things that I think are useful, and hopefully y'all can get some use out of that as well. Thanks for rocking with me. Let's get started. Know yourself.